Tonight, we're going back more than 3,000 years to a river plain in the Levant where two Bronze Age superpowers tried to settle an argument the loud way. This is Kadesh, around 1274 BC. It's not the first battle humans ever fought, but it's one of the earliest battles where we can follow the action in unusual detail: march routes, deception, an ambush, a camp in chaos, and a counterattack that becomes legend. And it's a story with two endings. One ending is carved into stone in Egypt, a heroic victory, a king standing alone against impossible odds. The other ending is written more quietly into geography and politics. Kadesh stays out of Egyptian hands, the war drags on, and a generation later, both sides sign what's often called the first recorded peace treaty between great powers. So, let's set the board. Kadesh sat near the Orontes River, a strategic knot in the roads that linked Egypt to the northern kingdoms and to the great powers of Anatolia and Mesopotamia. Control Kadesh meant control of movement, trade, and influence. If you wanted to project power in the region, Kadesh was the door you had to either hold or break. On the southern side was the new kingdom of Egypt, ruled by Ramses II, young in his reign and hungry for prestige. On the northern side was the Hittite Empire, ruled at the time by Muwatalli II, defending its sphere of influence in Syria. This wasn't just a border dispute, it was the late Bronze Age version of great power competition. Alliances, vassal cities, tribute, and the constant question of who gets to call themselves the strong king. So Ramesses marched north with an army organized into divisions named after gods: Amun, Ra, Ptah, and Seth, plus supporting troops, logistics, and allied contingents. The important detail is that these divisions did not move as one tight block. They moved as separate columns along the road, spread out by distance and time. That spacing is normal on a march. It's also exactly what a defender wants to see. Because if you can't beat the entire army at once, you don't have to. You just have to hit the army while it's divided, before the pieces can lock together. And the Hittites were watching. Muwatalli had brought a large force, heavy on chariots, fast, shock troops of the Bronze Age. A chariot isn't a tank, it doesn't smash through walls. It's a weapon for open ground, speed, momentum, intimidation, and the ability to turn a marching column into a scattering crowd in minutes. The terrain around Kadesh suited them: open plains near the river, room to maneuver, and a fortified city that could hide movement and intentions. Now comes the pivot that turns this from a straightforward siege into a tactical thriller: intelligence. As Ramesses approached, he received reports that suggested the Hittite main force was far away, supposedly north, out of immediate reach. Whether this came from captured scouts, locals under pressure, or deliberate Hittite deception, the effect was the same. Ramesses believed he had time. So he advanced quickly and set up camp near Kadesh, preparing to take the city before the enemy could concentrate. But the enemy was already concentrated. The Hittite army was close, hidden, and positioned to strike. And they weren't aiming for a heroic duel, they were aiming for timing. Here's the geometry of the ambush. Ramesses and the Amun division were ahead, near the camp. The other Egyptian divisions were still arriving, stretched out along the road. The Hittite chariot force, concealed and ready, waited for one of those divisions to approach the camp in march formation, unready, unformed, vulnerable. Then the chariots hit. They surged across the river and slammed into the approaching Egyptian column, often identified as the Ra division, catching it in the worst possible moment: in transit, in line, not in battle order. Chariots tear up that kind of formation. They split it, scatter it, and then the panic does the rest. The shock rolled straight into the Egyptian camp. Imagine what a camp looks like right before a battle. Tents, supplies, animals, water, men trying to rest, officers trying to impose order, and the constant background noise of a huge army trying to exist in one place. Now imagine chariots bursting in at speed. The Egyptian accounts describe a sudden collapse of order, troops fleeing, equipment overturned, the camp breached, men cut down where they stood. It's not hard to picture why. A camp is not built to withstand a high-speed strike. It's built to sleep in. And once the perimeter breaks, a terrifying thing happens. People stop thinking in units and start thinking as individuals. This is the moment where battles can end in disaster, when an ambush becomes a rout, when a commander loses the ability to issue orders that matter. And this is where Ramses' story becomes famous. In the Egyptian narrative, Ramses finds himself isolated, with enemy chariots swirling through the camp and his army collapsing around him. He calls out to the gods, he rages at his officers for abandoning him, and then, like the lead in an action epic, he charges. The reliefs and texts portray him launching repeated counterattacks from his chariot, driving into the attackers again and again, restoring morale through sheer personal presence. We should be honest, this is propaganda. It's carved to glorify a king, to present him as the chosen warrior of the gods. But propaganda usually grows out of a real crisis. A story like this doesn't get commissioned unless something went badly enough to need a story that loud. So, what likely happened beneath the heroic paint? A camp defense begins with creating a stable core, some point of order in the storm. Ramses and his household troops may have rallied around him. Officers may have reformed pockets of infantry. Chariot crews may have countercharged into the attackers where the ground and space allowed. And then another human factor kicked in: discipline on the attacking side. A chariot raid that breaks into a camp creates temptation, looting, capturing high-value gear, grabbing prisoners, chasing prizes instead of finishing the enemy's command structure. If the Hittite chariots dispersed to plunder, their mass and their shock effect dissipated. The spear point becomes a scatter of raiders, and a scatter of raiders can be driven off. The Egyptian counterattack pushed the Hittite chariot force back towards the river crossings. In tight spaces, speed becomes danger. Wheels tangle, horses collide. A retreat turns into a scramble. And then, crucially, more Egyptians arrived. The later arriving divisions, including Ptah and a group often identified as reinforcements from Egypt's allies, reached the battlefield as the fight was still unresolved. This is the difference between a defeated army and an army that survives: coherence plus time. If you can hold together long enough for fresh troops to arrive, an ambush can turn into an overextension. By the end of the day, neither side had achieved the decisive outcome it wanted. Egypt did not capture Kadesh. The Hittites did not destroy the Egyptian army. Both sides could claim something, and both sides did. Ramses' version, carved on temple walls, is loud and clear. The king faced overwhelming odds, the army faltered, and he personally turned the tide. It's heroic, dramatic, and designed to be remembered. The strategic reality looks more like a draw. The Hittites held their position in the region. Kadesh did not become Egyptian territory. Egypt proved it could survive a major ambush and still project force, but it did not secure the decisive victory the inscriptions suggest. So why is this battle still famous? Because Kadesh gives us something rare: the shape of Bronze Age warfare, captured with enough detail to reconstruct decisions. You can see the importance of scouting and misinformation. You can see how the spacing of marching divisions creates vulnerability. You can see the power of chariots as a shock weapon, devastating against an unformed column, less decisive once the defender regains coherence. You can see how a camp breach creates chaos. And you can see how leadership, reinforcement timing, and discipline can pull an army back from a collapse. And then there's the second ending, the one that matters just as much as the fighting. The conflict between Egypt and the Hittites didn't stop immediately after Kadesh. Pressure continued in the region, alliances shifted, and both powers faced other threats and internal concerns. Over time, the logic of endless campaigning ran into the reality of cost. And about 15 years later, under Ramses II and the Hittite king Hattusili III, the two empires concluded a formal peace agreement. This treaty survives in versions from both sides. It includes pledges of non-aggression, commitments to mutual assistance if a third party attacks, and provisions about the return of fugitives. Diplomacy written down as a tool of statecraft. It's not world peace, it's practical. It's two powerful states recognizing that stable borders and predictable obligations can be more valuable than one more season of raids and sieges. And that is why Kadesh is more than a dramatic chariot battle. It's a case study in how wars are fought when technology is fast but communication is slow, when information can decide an entire day, and when a ruler's